Morning, church. Whoa, was that loud? Okay, cast your mind back. It was the 1990s. It was a different time. Every second girl had the Rachel haircut. And if you remember the phones in our homes, the handset was connected to the wall. And so if you wanted to go into the next room, you really had to hope that the cable was long enough to talk to your girlfriend. We listened to the music on the latest technology. We gave up our albums because CDs were the way to go. Hardly anyone had an email address. If you wanted to connect to the information superhighway, also known today as the internet, you had to use that same home phone line. And unfortunately, if someone rang you while you're on the internet, it dropped the connection. It was so annoying. And it was in 1993, hopefully you remember this, that the Trinidadian German Eurodance singer and philosopher Haddaway asked the question in dance clubs around the world, what is love? Do you remember that? You may not like that song, right? I knew that was going to be a problem. And I bet you're sorry I mentioned it, because once it gets in your head, it's stuck. But it's a good question. And in case you haven't heard the song, and I won't hum any of it, he didn't have any answer to that question, what is love? And I don't think you're going to find any answers in the 1990s dance clubs, and probably not today either. Now, I don't know if Haddaway, he thought about this, but the question he asked is really an ancient one. And it doesn't get old. Every generation needs to ask this question, what is love? Now, in John 13:34, Jesus says this, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, that text is the center of this new teaching series called Love One Another that Mark kicked off last week. Did anyone here miss it? Just leave now. You can go home and listen to YouTube. Click a like and subscribe while you're there. Jesus said, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. But what did Jesus mean when he used the word love? In English, the word love has many meanings. And we understand the meaning based on the context of how it's used, right? Let me give you a few examples of the different way love is used. Number one, I love it when a plan comes together. That was a catchphrase of John Hannibal Smith in the 80s TV series, The A-Team. Anyone remember that? Fun fact, George Peppard, he hated Mr. T. Other fun fact, Mr. T was a born-again Christian. Second example, I love pizza. Someone recently told me that they loved pizza so much that one of their early jobs was at Pizza Hut. And over time, they tried pretty much every pizza style that was being sold, and by the end of that, he was pretty much sick of pizza. And a third example is this, I love you, Mom. My youngest said that to my wife just this week. He's still at the age when he can say that. When they get a bit older, then they stop saying that. Then when you get to my age, we start saying it again. Now, in all those examples, think about it, love doesn't mean exactly the same thing. The word love is covering a lot of ground. You know, what if I said to my wife, I love you like I love spaghetti and meatballs? That doesn't really work, does it? The nature and quality and significance of my love for spaghetti and meatballs is fundamentally different to my love for my wife. That should be obvious, right? But it's the same word. So it's an English language problem that we have here. The question is still relevant. What is love? Okay, we're going to get a bit biblical here. Warning, Greek words are coming ahead. What word did Jesus actually use? Now that answer, it's a bit complicated. When Jesus spoke those words, the language he used was most likely Aramaic. So for the Jews at that time period, it was the language of the common people. It wasn't Hebrew, which was the language of religion and government and the upper class. They're cousin languages. Now, when the New Testament was written and it was assembled, the authors used the language of literature, and so you probably know that was known as Koine, or Common Greek. It's one of those words I practiced at home, and I still didn't get it right. Sorry, anyone give me some help there? Anyway, it's not a cousin to Aramaic at all. It's a different family entirely of language. So whatever Jesus originally said in Aramaic, it had to be translated into Greek. So the writer had to choose the best word in Greek, which reflected what Jesus was saying. And it turns out that Greek has a number of different words for love. Now, that in itself is a curiosity, right? It tells us how the Greeks thought about the different concepts and meanings which we attribute to that one word called love. And that's going to help us to answer the question, what is love? C.S. Lewis is a modern Christian writer who popularized the idea that Greek had 4 words for love. His book called The Four Loves, it's a modern classic in Christian writing. I have a copy from my dad's library. It's got yellow pages in it. I was looking at it this week. So here are the 4 words for love in Greek. Storge, that refers to the natural or instinctual affection, such as the love of a parent towards their children and vice versa. So back to our first example, my son was saying, I storge you, Mum. The second one is philia. That's the bond we have between friends. Do you remember the immortal words of the boxer Jeff Fennick? I love yous all. And what he meant was, I philia yous all. The third one is eros. This is romantic love, which includes, but is more than just, sexual attraction. It was such an important idea to the Greeks that one of their gods was named Eros. And another example, when Princess Leia finally confesses to Han Solo, when he's about to be frozen in carbonite, that I love you, she means I eros you. Remember what he says back? I know. So cool. She was too good for him, really. The last example is agape. This is a general empathy or loving kindness expressed for all people. It's universal love. C.S. Lewis, in his book, he calls it charity. Now, it turns out that the Greeks had 3 more words for love. There was uncommitted love, there was practical love, and there was self-love. And for this discussion, we'll just stick to these 4. Now, firstly, how do these ideas of love separate themselves? How are they different? Storge is natural or instinctual love. It's the first love we experience in life. We're born into that. We don't have to try with that kind of love. It's the love within a family, and as we often hear, you can't choose your family. This type of love is easy to understand, especially if you had a good family experience. And even if you haven't, you can see glimpses of storge even in unhappy family situations. And you can see it in other families. Now, philia, that's the love between friends. While good friendships, they feel natural, like storge, they always start with a choice. You're not born into friendships. You choose to be friends with this person, and you choose to not be friends with another. It's often true that the circumstances put people together, and through these circumstances, philia grows, but it's always a choice. Again, in good friendships, it doesn't feel like you have to try, right? They feel natural. But you absolutely do need to try with friends. You have to work on the relationships more than family. Because when you stop trying, the friendship usually dies. Like storge, philia, it's easy for us to understand. It's probably the second example of love that we experience in life. Now, eros is romantic love. In the Christian worldview, it's within the context of marriage between a man and a woman. Is eros a choice, or is it something instinctual? Well, you're certainly choosing someone. and they're choosing you back. That's how it works. And when that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. So there must be choice involved. When you listen to many people who talk about the experience of eros or romantic love, it almost sounds as if romantic love, it chose them, as if they didn't have a choice at all. They fall head over heels in love. They're shot by Cupid's arrow. That's the Roman version of eros. What I think it shows, though, is the consuming nature of this love, which drives people together. Eros fuses, or it binds two people into a singular, special relationship. Eros, like the first two, it's easy to understand. If not directly through your own experience, then indirectly. And it's likely to be the third example that many people experience in life of these loves. Now, I think these three concepts of love, they translate well from the Greek into the English. They seem to be, to me, they're cross-cultural ideas, and that's why they're helpful. They're universal ideas. So in modern Australian culture, we may place a different emphasis or value on these types of love compared to the ancient Greeks, or the modern French or the Indians or Vietnamese, right? We all happen to have a different balance in terms of those loves or emphasis. But definitely we know that they exist because we all experience them. What about the last love, agape? This is a universal love expressed for all people. What does that actually look like? How do we experience agape in our day-to-day life? What concrete examples do we see? Now, just pause for a moment. Try to imagine the world outside your Christian perspective. I know it's almost impossible, but try. How often do we experience or see examples of universal love in every day? I don't actually think it's a common cross-cultural experience. Now, it's not completely absent, but it certainly isn't every day. Sure, we understand the concept, much like I understand the concept of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a theory in physics where objects have characteristics of both particles and waves. What more can I tell you? There's a slit experiment, and anyway, that's about all I can remember. That's it. I barely understand it at a conceptual level. It doesn't impact my life, doesn't impact my behavior. Agape was like quantum physics. To the Greeks, it was an idea of love, a concept, but without any real legs, without meaningful examples. It was a word in theory, but in practice, it's a shrug. So when Christians started writing about Jesus, they said, here in the flesh is the true meaning of agape love. In all your philosophy, in all your centuries of thinking, you trace the outline of something which is true, but you had nothing to fill it with. It was an empty balloon. But we know God because we've seen his Son, Jesus Christ, who showed us the way of agape love. Let us tell you what agape means. So they took that word and they made it their own. Our words, they don't define God. At best, they're tentative attempts to describe in a human language someone who cannot be fully described or imagined. God defines the words that describe him. He gives meaning to those words. He shows us what love really is. What is love? Here's what the Bible says. 1 Corinthians 13:4. Agape is patient. It's kind. Agape does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't delight in evil, but it rejoices with truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Agape never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Now that's a definition. That's got legs on it. In 1 John 3:16, he says, "This is how we know what agape is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." That's got legs on it. And 1 John 4:16, "And so we know and rely on the agape God has for us. God is agape. Whoever lives in agape lives in God, and God in them." You see how the writers took that shell of a word and they explained how it was full of meaning and significance by pointing to the revelation of God. God through his actions of love. God who is love. So, how do these four loves work together? Romantic love, family love, friendship love, this self-sacrificing love. The New Testament writers, they're clear that the highest love, it's agape. It's the self-sacrificing love as shown by Jesus Christ. Now, some Christian writers describe the relationship between the other loves as steps on a ladder, and they direct us towards the highest love. I think that's really helpful. Let's re-examine each one of those now in light of that. So firstly, the Bible affirms the notion of romantic love when fulfilled in a marriage. God is for eros love. It's his idea. He designed it as part of our makeup. In Ephesians 5:31, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. That's interesting, right? You've heard that before. Paul, earlier in that passage, he's encouraging the church to reflect in their marriage the pattern of love that Jesus shows for his church. In other words, agape love shows us how true eros love should be. Indeed, there's a mystical union between Christ and his church, which is like the relationship between a bride and a groom. So that love has exclusivity, it has passion, it has intimacy. Except eros love or marriage is not a metaphor for Jesus and the church, because that's the tail wagging the dog. Agape love is the highest love which we should see reflected in eros love. It came first. Secondly, the Old and New Testament affirms the notion of family and love within a family. Again, it was his idea. He designed that as part of our makeup. In Isaiah 43:6-7, he said, "Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth, everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and I made." And in John 1:12, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name." So God says we're his children, and Jesus invites us to be children of God. The inherent limitations of storge or family love, they're biological. If you're not in the family, you're not in the family. But God says we're all part of his family. Agape love is not constrained by biology. In God's family, we find a love of forgiveness and acceptance and a place to grow, just like a family. Agape love is the highest love, which expands the bounds of a family love, and it sets it free from its constraints. And lastly, the Bible also affirms friendship and the love between friends. In John 15:12, "My command is this, love each other as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. That's simply a remarkable statement. Jesus calling us his friends. Within Jewish thought, God calling his chosen people his friends, it was incomprehensible. There was a great separation between God and humanity. Now, we've got isolated examples in the Bible where God relates to people in a more casual way. You know, God spoke to Moses like a friend, and God walked in the garden in the cool of the day. But if you understand friendship, it requires some level of relational equality. Every pauper wants to be a friend of a king, but every king doesn't want to be a friend of paupers. It doesn't work. Friendships work when we see each other eye to eye and face to face in a relational sense. For a pauper to be a friend of a king, the pauper can either become a king or the king can become a pauper. So the constraint of filial love is that we could never be friends with God. But God himself came down in human flesh, and he walked the earth, and he lived amongst us. He died for us so he could call us his friends. He walked with us. Agape love is the highest love, which expands the bounds of friendship love and sets it free from its constraints. It separates that, it destroys that barrier between us and him. Agape love is the highest love, which we see reflected in all the other loves. It shows us how the constraints of other loves, they can be overcome. It's the best love, which all other loves points to. And that's why Jesus says, a new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this will everyone know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Who will tell this world of this wonderful thing called agape love? How will the world understand that agape love is the highest love? How can they see that the other loves all point to this greatest love? They need to see it in us. That's what the Bible says. They need to see it in our actions, in our behaviors, and it should inform and elevate all the other loves we have in our lives. Just as we have seen his love, we must show love so that others can see the love that God has for them. What is love? I think that question is possibly the best one you could ever ask yourself today. Bless you, church.